I watched the thing step out upon the floe where no man could stand, the ice beneath it sagging yet unbroken, its limbs too long by half and pale as compressed snow. The wind died as if a bell jar had been lowered over us. Our breath smoked, then hung motionless. It turned its head without turning its body, and every dog in the team flattened itself, teeth chattering in silence. Men have pressed me over the years to set these events in order, though I confess I doubt whether order can be found in them. If you would hear more such accounts, lend your ear, mark your approval, and leave your own recollections and notions below. I will read them, and perhaps answer while I still have the strength. To understand what we encountered, I must return to the winter of 1901, before the ice learned our names. We had sailed from Dundee aboard the factory ship Albatross in late July, bound for the rich whaling grounds off West Greenland. I was then 28 years of age, a surgeon by training, carried as ship's doctor and naturalist. The master, Captain James Ritchie, had hunted those waters for a decade and more. Our charts were worn at the creases, our sextants polished, our rifles oiled and wrapped in oiled cloth against the salt. By mid-August, we lay off the coast near Upernavik, the low black line of rock and snow to the east, the pack ice pressing in from the west. The midnight sun had begun its slow descent into longer nights, though there was still a pallid glow even at 2 in the morning. We took whales when we could, processed them in the reeking heat of the try-works, and sent the boats farther and farther into the leads as the season advanced. It was on the 24th of August that the captain resolved to send a small party ashore to barter with the Inuit at a settlement reported some miles to the north, and to reconnoitre the state of the coastal ice. He chose 4 of us: Henderson, our first mate, a taciturn Scotsman who trusted his compass more than any man Larson, a Dane who spoke halting Greenlandic and had wintered once in Godthob young Owen, a Welsh harpooner with a quick laugh and quicker temper, and myself. We were to take a whaleboat, 2 sledges, 8 dogs and provisions for a fortnight. We left the Albatross in a thin drift of snow, though the calendar still said summer. The air had a metallic taste, and the sea smoked faintly where it met the colder wind. I remember the creak of the oars in their locks as we threaded through the floes, the dogs whining low in the stern, their breath already frosting their whiskers. By evening, we had made a temporary camp on a gravel spit beneath a low basalt cliff. We pitched our canvas tent, stowed the pemmican, biscuit and paraffin, and set a watch. The aurora that night was a pale curtain, more suggestion than light, and the dogs turned in their traces, restless, though no bear sign had been seen. In those first days ashore, my mind was full of practicalities. I noted in my journal the exact latitude and longitude by sextant and chronometer, sketched the coastline, and pressed a few hardy lichens between paper. The ice lay in broad pans, drifted against one another, with dark leads between. There was nothing upon it but wind and our own tracks. The first oddity came so quietly that I barely marked it. On the second night, as Henderson and I shared the middle watch, we heard a sound from the direction of the floe edge. It was not the crack of ice, nor the bark of a seal, but something like a man calling across a great distance, the syllables drawn thin by the cold. The wind was from the land, so no sound from the ship could have reached us. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Henderson kept his gaze upon the dim line of the ice. "Fox," most like, he said. They make all manner of queer cries. Keep your rifle close. I accepted his explanation. Foxes, owls, the shifting of the floes. The Arctic is a ventriloquist. Yet, as I turned back toward the dark, I saw that the dogs were all facing the same way, ears pricked, tails down, the hair along their spines standing up. On the fourth day, we reached the Inuit settlement, a scattering of low turf houses above a sheltered bay. Smoke curled from holes in the snow-covered roofs. The men came out to meet us, narrow-eyed against the glare, their parkas rimed with frost. Larson hailed them, and after some exchange, we were welcomed inside. The warmth and the smell of seal oil were almost overwhelming after the knife-edge air outside. We bartered knives, powder, and cloth for fresh meat and information about the ice to the north. The men spoke of a winter that had lingered too long, of strange fogs that lay upon the sea even when the wind rose, and of the ice forming in patterns they did not expect. One older hunter, his face a map of fine lines, watched us in silence until the others had finished. Then he spoke a few words to Larson, never taking his eyes from mine. He says, Larson translated slowly, that we should not go east onto the land ice. There is something there this year, something that walks when the wind stops. I smiled then, eager to show no superstition before these men. Bears walk when the wind stops, I said. We have good rifles. The old man did not smile. He raised his hand and made a gesture as if smoothing something flat in the air. Not bear, Larson said. Not man. He calls it the one that is pale against the pale. I wrote it off as a piece of local law, the sort of story that grows in any hard country. Yet when we left the settlement with full sledges and lighter hearts, I glanced back once and saw the old hunter standing alone outside his house, watching us go. His fur hood blown back by a wind I did not yet feel. That night, in our own little tent upon the shore, we had a rare moment of ease. The dogs were fed and quiet, the rifles cleaned, the paraffin stove ticking softly. Owen produced a small tin of tobacco from his sea chest, and we passed it around, each man rolling a thin cigarette. Another season, and I will have enough laid by, Owen said, exhaling a thread of smoke that was snatched away by the draught. I will go back to Swansea, buy a little public house near the docks. No more frozen ropes and salt sores, only warm beer and warmer girls. Larson laughed softly. You will miss the ice, he said. You men always do. It is a sickness. And you? I asked him. What will you do when you have had your fill of Greenland? He shrugged. I thought once I might be a schoolmaster, he said. Teach boys their letters, but the sea is a jealous wife. She does not let go easily. Henderson, who had been silent, spoke at last. I will stay with her, he said. There is nothing for me ashore. I remember the look in his eye then, the calm certainty of a man who believed the world, though harsh, was knowable. I shared that belief. I had read my Darwin, my Lyell. The world was old, but its laws were firm. If there were things we did not yet understand, we would in time. Had I understood the warning in that old hunter's stare, I might have argued harder when, 2 days later, Henderson proposed that we leave the security of the coastal floes and venture eastward onto the landfast ice to take a shorter route back to the Albatross. It will save us 3 days, he said, tapping the chart spread upon his knee. The ice is solid. See here, pressed against the land. We cut across this bay, then south along the glacier's edge. The captain will be glad of the news. Larson frowned. The hunters said the ice was strange this year, he reminded him. They do not go that way. Henderson snorted. They are afraid of their own shadows. We have compass, sextant, and sound legs. The dogs are fresh. I will not waste time hugging the coast like an old woman. I found myself siding with him. The weather had held fair, the sky a high, hard blue. The leads between the floes had narrowed, and the land ice looked as level as a parade ground. We will be careful, I said. If we find bad ice, we can always turn back. So it was agreed. In the morning, we set out eastward, the sledges hissing over the snow, the dogs leaning into their traces. The land rose in a long white ramp before us, the glacier's face gleaming like glass. The world was reduced to 3 colors: the blue of the sky, the white of the ice, and the black of our own figures moving across it. It was there, upon that deceptive plain, that the sound came again. At first, I thought it was the wind shifting, a low moan that rose and fell without direction. Then I realized the air was still. Our breath went straight up, and the flags on the sledges hung limp. Yet the sound persisted, a long, drawn note that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The dogs faltered. Their ears went back and they bunched together, nearly tangling the traces. "Hold up," Henderson called. We brought the sledges to a stop. "What is that?" Owen asked. His voice was too loud in the stillness. "Pressure ridge somewhere," I said, though I knew the sound of ice grinding against ice. And this was not it. The ice is always moving, but the note did not end as the groan of shifting floes does. It held, wavered, and then broke into something like a series of breaths, too slow for any living chest. We stood there, 4 small figures upon an endless sheet, listening. When the sound faded at last, it did so not into silence, but into a kind of absence, as if even the faintest noises of our own bodies had been muffled. I could not hear my own heartbeat. The hairs on my arms prickled beneath my woolen layers. "Let us move on," Larson said at last. His voice seemed to come from a long way off, though he stood beside me. Standing here will not improve matters. We pressed on. The rational mind is a stubborn thing. I told myself that we had heard some curious resonance in the glacier. The wind trapped in a crevasse and released in a strange fashion. The fact that the dogs had pressed their bellies to the snow, their eyes rolling white, I put down to their own nervous natures. By late afternoon, cloud had come up from the north, a high, thin veil that turned the light flat and directionless. Shadows vanished. The horizon merged with the sky, so that it was difficult to say where the world ended. We marched by compass and dead reckoning, Henderson checking the needle every few minutes. It was then that we saw the first tracks. They crossed our path at a shallow angle, a line of depressions in the snow, half filled by drift. At first, I thought them the prints of a bear, but as we drew closer, something in their regularity troubled me. They were set too far apart for any creature of that weight, as if whatever had made them had legs much longer than its body would suggest. "Bear?" Owen said, though his tone made it a question. Henderson knelt beside one of the prints, brushing away the loose snow with a mittened hand. The depression was oval, not round, and there were no claw marks at the foredge, only a smooth, flat surface, as if something broad and unjointed had pressed down. "Could be melted out," I said. "The wind shapes things oddly. Perhaps the original print has been distorted." "Perhaps," Henderson said, but he did not sound convinced. We followed the line of tracks with our eyes. They ran straight as a ruled line across the ice, up a slight rise, and then simply ceased. There was no crack, no change in the surface to account for it. One print, another, and then unmarked snow to the horizon. "The drift has covered the rest," I said. Even as I spoke, I knew it was not so. The snow was hard-packed and unbroken. Larson straightened slowly. "We should turn back to the coast," he said. "The ice is not right here." Henderson looked from the compass in his hand to the blank world around us. "We are too far in to waste the day," he said. "We press on another hour. If we see anything worse than queer prints, we turn back." "Agreed." No one answered. At length he took our silence for assent, and we moved forward, skirting the line where the tracks had been, as if it marked something unclean. It was near the middle of the next day, when the monotony of marching and the hiss of the sledges had lulled us into a kind of waking stupor, that the thing happened which I can find no words to fit neatly into cause and effect. The sky had lowered, the light gone grey. Fine snow fell without wind, each flake descending in a straight, slow line. The dogs pulled steadily, their breath rising in little clouds. My mind had drifted to warmer places. A lecture hall in Edinburgh, the smell of ink and chalk. Without warning, every dog in the team screamed. It was not a bark, nor a howl, but a high, tearing sound, as if their throats were being pulled out of them. They flung themselves sideways, straining against the traces, their eyes wild. One broke free and bolted, its paws scrabbling desperately on the smooth surface. It had gone no more than 10 yards when it stopped, as if it had run into a wall. There was nothing before it. No ridge, no crack, no obstacle of any kind. Yet the dog skidded, yelped, and then was jerked backwards, its body lifting from the ice. For a heartbeat, it hung there, legs flailing, held by nothing that I could see. Its jaw worked soundlessly, the scream cut off, and then it flew toward us, past us, as if flung by some invisible hand. It struck the ice 30 yards behind the sledges with a sound like a sack of meat dropped from a height. When we reached it, its neck was broken cleanly, its eyes staring, its tongue black against its teeth. "What in God's name?" Owen began, his voice cracking. "There must be a fissure," I said, though there had been no sign of one. A gust of wind, some trick, but the air was still. The snow fell straight down. The only disturbance in that flawless surface was the furrow the dog's body had made as it slid. We buried the animal there. Though the ground was only ice and snow, it seemed better to cover it. The remaining dogs huddled together, refusing to meet our eyes. None of us spoke as we harnessed them again. From that moment, my rational explanations began to fray. I could still mouth the words, fissure, wind, optical illusion, but they no longer settled in my mind as they once had. Something had acted upon that dog, something that had weight and will, and yet left no mark upon the world that I could discern. The days that followed blurred. Our sleep grew poor, our tempers short. At night, when we lay in our tent with the canvas snapping faintly in the cold, I would hear, beneath the creaks and sighs of the ice, a soft, dragging sound, as if something heavy were being drawn slowly over the surface at some great distance. Whenever I raised my head to listen, it ceased. Once, in the small hours, I woke to find the tent filled with a faint, sour odor, like old snow that has lain over something dead. It was gone by morning, and I said nothing, for fear that the others would think my mind had turned. The dogs grew thinner, though we fed them the same. They refused to sleep upon the bare ice, worrying at the snow until they had made little pits to curl in, as if they wished to be below the surface, not upon it. On the 7th day since we had left the settlement, the wind rose at last, a low, steady breath from the west. We were all relieved, for the unbroken stillness had become a presence in itself. The snow that had lain in soft drifts now lifted in ghostly veils, streaming across the ice. We had just broken camp when Henderson, who was ahead, stopped and raised his hand. "There," he said. "Do you see it?" At first, I saw nothing but the usual confusion of white upon white. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I made out a shape upon the ice perhaps 200 yards ahead. It was low and elongated, like a man crawling, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long, the head too small, and there was a curious flatness to it, as if it had been pressed. "It is a seal," I said, though no seal would be so far from open water, or some trick of the drift. The shape moved. It did not rise, but seemed to slide, its limbs trailing, leaving no track behind it. It passed behind a low hummock of snow and did not emerge. We stood there, our faces stung by the wind, the dogs whimpering softly. No one suggested going closer. At length, Henderson shook himself, as if casting off a weight. "We are turning south," he said, his voice hoarse. "We will make for the coast. I will not have us out on this cursed sheet another night." No one argued. The ice, however, had its own designs. As we altered course, we found the surface broken by new pressure ridges, low thrusts of shattered ice that forced us to weave a tortuous path. The compass needle, which had been steady, now wavered, trembling between north and east in a way I had never seen. Henderson tapped it, frowned, and at last thrust it into his pocket with a muttered oath. We marched by the line of the land, a faint, darker smudge on the horizon, and by the position of the sun when it deigned to show itself. The wind strengthened, bringing with it fine ice crystals that cut the face like sand. Our world shrank to the circle of visibility around us. It was in that grey half-light, with the wind at our backs and the dogs pulling grimly, that we reached the moment from which all my nights since have radiated. We had come to a broad, flat expanse, free of ridges, the snow scoured hard by the wind. The land was no more than a suggestion to our right. The dogs slowed of their own accord, their heads low. The wind, which had been a steady pressure on our backs, faltered and then ceased, as if a door had been shut. The sudden absence of sound was like a blow. My ears rang. The snow that had been flying now hung in the air, each grain suspended, turning slowly as if in thick glass. "Do you feel that?" Owen whispered. I felt it. The air had grown heavier, as if some vast weight pressed down upon us. It was not colder exactly, but there was a quality to it that made the lungs labour, as if it were thicker than ordinary air. Ahead of us, the surface of the ice changed. It did not crack or rise. It did not move in any way that I could have pointed to. Yet there was a region, perhaps 50 yards across, where the very texture of the light shifted. The snow there seemed flatter, more compressed, as if it had been under some great pressure for a long time. It was upon that patch that the thing stepped. I say stepped, though its movement was not like that of any creature I have known. It emerged from nothing, becoming visible as one might see a figure appear in a developing photograph. First an outline, then a density, then a pale, almost translucent form, as if made of the same substance as the ice itself, but packed more tightly. It was taller than a man by half, yet terribly thin, its its limbs long and tapering, without joints that I could see. Where a head should have been, there was an oval, slightly flattened, featureless, save for two depressions that suggested eyes, though there was nothing within them that caught the light. Its surface was not smooth, but faintly striated, like ice that has been under pressure for ages. It placed one limb forward, and the ice beneath it sagged, not cracking, but bowing, as if it were walking upon the surface of a deep pond. With each step, the sag followed it, a slow depression that moved with it, then rose again when it passed, leaving no mark. The dogs flattened themselves upon the ice, their bodies pressed so low that their bellies touched, their legs splayed. Their teeth chattered, but no sound came out. My own breath, which had been a white plume, now hung before my face, unmoving, a little cloud that did not disperse. The thing turned its head toward us. It did not turn its body. The oval simply rotated atop the narrow suggestion of a neck, too far, past the point at which any spine could bend. The depressions that were like eyes aligned with us. I felt then, not that it saw us, but that it felt us, as one might feel heat from a stove. There was a sensation upon my skin, a crawling prickle, as if a cold hand had passed over my face without touching it. No one spoke. My hand had gone to the rifle slung at my shoulder, but I could not bring myself to raise it. Some part of me, deep and old, knew that to offer violence to this thing would be to invite something far worse than death. It took another step toward us. The sag in the ice followed, a slow wave. As it did so, the suspended snow between us and it moved slightly, drawn toward it, then settling again. The air around it seemed denser, as if it carried its own atmosphere. "Back," Larsen said, very softly. "Do not run. Back." We began to retreat, one step at a time, our boots making no sound upon the ice. The thing advanced at the same pace, its limbs rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. There was no haste in it, no anger, only a terrible inevitability, as if it had all the time in the world. The distance between us did not change. We walked backwards until my legs shook, my thighs burning. The thing continued, always the same space away. The dogs slid along the ice on their bellies, their claws scrabbling uselessly. The air grew thicker, the pressure greater, until my ears ached and my teeth felt as if they would crack. Then, somewhere beyond my sight, the wind moved. I did not feel it at first, but I saw the suspended grains of snow stir, then begin to fall properly once more. The little cloud of my breath broke apart and drifted. The pressure in my ears eased. The sag beneath the thing's limbs lessened. It stopped. For a long moment it stood there, its featureless face turned toward us. Then, as it had come, it went, not by turning and walking away, but by becoming less. Its outline faded, its density thinned, and in a few heartbeats there was nothing there but a patch of ice that looked no different from any other. The four of us stood panting, our chests heaving, though the air was still. My legs trembled so that I feared I would fall. Owen began to laugh, a high, broken sound, until Henderson struck him, not hard, but enough to break the spell. "South," Henderson said. "Now, we are done here." We turned away as one man, not daring to look back. The dogs, as if released from some invisible hand, scrambled to their feet and lunged into their traces with a frenzy I have never seen before or since. We did not argue about direction. The land lay to our right. We kept it there and moved. In the hours that followed, Our world narrowed to the act of putting one foot before the other. None of us spoke of what we had seen. It lay between us like a third presence, walking just behind our shoulders. That night, we camped upon a low hummock of wind-packed snow, the land now a darker line much closer. The wind had returned in earnest, shrieking around the tent, making its walls belly in and out. The familiar noise was almost a comfort. Inside, the four of us sat hunched over the little stove, the flame a tiny, wavering thing. No one reached for the tobacco. "What was it?" Owen said at last. His voice was hoarse, as if he had been shouting all day. "Some trick of the light," I said automatically. The words sounded absurd even as I spoke them. Henderson stared at his hands. "I saw the ice bend beneath it," he said. "Light does not weigh anything." Larson, who had been silent, spoke without looking up. "There are stories," he said, "among the Greenlanders, of things that live in the old ice. Not spirits exactly, not animals. Things that are to us as we are to the lice in a man's beard. We move, they feel. Sometimes they turn." "We are educated men," I said, more sharply than I intended. "We cannot. Educated men have died out here," Larson said. "Their educations did not help them." We fell silent. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind screamed, and the ice answered with its own groans and cracks. Familiar now. Almost homely compared to the soundless pressure of that encounter. In the days that followed, we drove ourselves hard. The land rose, the ice roughened, and at last we reached the broken jumble of the coastal floes. Never have I been so glad to see dirty, ridged ice and open leads of dark water. The wind, the creak of the floes, the bark of distant seals, all the ordinary sounds of that harsh place were a balm. Yet the ice had one more cruelty for us. On the second day among the floes, as we threaded the sledges between hummocks, Owen slipped. His foot went through a crusted-over crack, and he plunged to his thigh in slush. We hauled him out quickly, but his boot had filled with icy water. By the time we made camp, his toes were white and senseless. I did what I could, rubbing them, wrapping them, but within a day, it was clear that the tissue had died. The skin turned a waxy grey, then black at the tips. The pain drove him nearly mad. He raved in the night, shouting of something pale that pressed against the tent, of a weight upon his chest. We amputated 2 of his toes there upon the ice, in the lee of a hummock, with Henderson holding him, and Larson pouring our precious spirits over the knife. His screams echoed off the floes and were snatched by the wind. I have performed worse operations in cleaner rooms, but never under such a sky. After that, he could not walk far. We loaded him upon a sledge when we could, but our strength was failing, and the dogs were half-starved. It was with a kind of animal relief that, one grey morning, we saw the mast of the Albatross rising above a line of pressure ridges like the bare trunk of a winter tree. The ship lay moored to a floe, her sides stained with oil, her rigging creaking. Smoke rose from the try-works. Men moved upon her deck, small, dark figures against the snow. The sight of her, solid and known, struck me harder than I expected. I found my eyes stinging. We were hailed as we approached, and a boat was lowered to meet us. Hands reached out, hauling us aboard. The familiar smell of tar, smoke, and stale bilge water wrapped around us like a blanket. Captain Ritchie stood at the rail, his beard rimed with frost, his eyes sharp. "By God, Henderson," he said, "you look as if you have marched to the pole and back. What kept you?" "Bad ice, sir," Henderson said. His voice was flat. We had to turn back from the land. Lost a dog. Owen has frostbite. The captain's gaze flicked over us, taking in our hollow cheeks, our shaking hands. "You shall tell me the particulars in my cabin," he said. "For now, get below, all of you. Doctor, see to your man." Below decks, in the cramped, oil-scented surgery, I dressed Owen's ruined foot as best I could. The ship's carpenter fashioned him a crude crutch. The other men, curious, came to ask about our journey, but we said little. How does one begin to speak of such a thing without sounding mad? That evening, the captain called us to his cabin. The lamp swung gently with the ship's motion, casting moving shadows upon the charts tacked to the bulkhead. A bottle of whiskey stood upon the table, 3/4 full. "Now," he said, when we were seated, "tell me what you saw." Henderson recounted our route, the weather, the state of the ice, the visit to the settlement. When he came to the old hunter's warning, the captain snorted. "They will say anything to keep you close so they can trade more," he said. "Go on." Then came the tracks, the strange sound, the dog. At that, the captain's brows drew together. "A fisher, surely," he said. "I have seen dogs lost that way. The ice is treacherous." "Yes, sir," Henderson said, though his eyes flickered toward me. "And then," the captain prompted. There was a pause. The ship's timbers creaked. "Then we turned south," Henderson said. "The ice was not as on the chart. There were pressure ridges where there should have been none. The compass behaved oddly. We saw—" He stopped. The captain took a sip of whiskey. "You saw what?" "Nothing of consequence, sir," Henderson said. "Drift, light. We were tired. We made for the coast." I felt a heat rise in me then. A mixture of outrage and relief. Relief, because to speak of that pale thing would have been to drag it into this cramped, lamplit room. Outrage, because some part of me wanted the burden of knowledge shared. "We saw something upon the ice," I said. My voice sounded thin. It left no tracks. The ice bent beneath it. The air. The captain held up a hand. "Doctor," he said, "you are a man of science. You know as well as I that the mind plays tricks when it is exhausted. I have seen mirages upon the pack that would make a sober man swear he saw London Bridge. You were tired, hungry, half frozen. You saw a shadow, a fog bank, some queer formation. That is all." "It was not a fog bank," I said. "It? What would you have me do with such a report?" He interrupted, not unkindly. "Write to the Admiralty that my surgeon has seen a ghost upon the ice. The company would laugh me out of my berth. We deal in facts here, not phantoms." He poured whiskey into 4 tin cups and pushed them toward us. "You will rest," he said. "You will eat. In a day or two, you will see that there is a simple explanation. For the log, we shall say that you were delayed by bad ice and the loss of a dog. That is true enough." There, in that small cabin, the official account of our journey was fixed. It would be entered in the ship's log, copied into the company's records in Dundee, perhaps glanced at by a clerk with ink-stained fingers. Delayed by bad ice, loss of 1 dog, 1 man frostbitten. The other truth, the one that sat like a stone in my chest, would remain unwritten. We did not speak of it among ourselves either, at least not in those first days. There was work to be done, whales to be flensed, blubber to be boiled, casks to be stowed. The routines of the ship closed around us, comforting in their familiarity. Yet, at night, when I lay in my narrow bunk, the creak of the timbers and the slap of the water against the hull would fade, and I would hear again that absence of sound, feel again the weight of that gaze without eyes. We returned to Scotland in October, our holds full, our hull scarred by the ice. Families waited upon the quay, their faces upturned. The newspapers printed the usual notices. Albatross returned from Greenland, good catch, minor delays. No mention was made of strange ice or of things that walked upon it. Life resumed, or appeared to. I took up a position at the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh, exchanging the reek of whale oil for that of carbolic. I married, in time, a patient. Kind woman who had never seen snow deeper than her ankles. We had a son. I lectured on frostbite and hypothermia to medical students, illustrating my points with cases from the voyage. Yet the ice had its hooks in me. The first winter after our return, I woke one night in our small house to a stillness so profound that I thought, for a moment, that I had gone deaf. The usual sounds of the city, distant wheels upon cobbles, the occasional shout, were absent. I lay there, my heart pounding, until I heard the slow, laboured breathing of my wife beside me and the faint crackle of the fire downstairs. It was only a lull in the wind, a pause in the life of the street, yet my skin crawled. I rose and went to the window, half expecting to see a white plain stretching away instead of tenements and gas lamps. Another time, some years later, I walked with my son along the water of Leith on a cold January day. The river was crusted with ice at the edges, the water dark in the centre. He, being a boy, threw stones, delighting in the way they skidded. One stone struck a patch of thin ice and broke through with a peculiar drawn-out sound, a kind of soft, wavering note. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow, the air thickening around us. I saw again that slow sag in the ice, that pale form. My hand shot out and seized his shoulder so hard that he cried out. "Do not go near the edge," I said, more harshly than I intended. "Do you hear me? Never trust the ice." He stared at me, wide-eyed, then nodded. For weeks after, he would not step on so much as a frozen puddle. I corresponded occasionally with Henderson and Larson. Owen I saw only once more, by chance, in a public house near the docks in Leith. He walked with a limp, his missing toes making his gait uneven. His face had aged beyond his years, the lines around his eyes deep. We spoke of small things at first: work, wages, the price of coal. At length, after a silence, he said, not looking at me, "Do you ever dream of it?" "Yes," I said. "In mine," he said, "it is not upon the ice, it is under the floorboards. I hear the wood sag, hear it dragging itself along. I wake, and the house is quiet, but I know if I put my ear to the boards, I would hear it still." We did not finish our drinks. In the years that followed, I read what I could of Arctic exploration. I studied the accounts of Parry, Franklin, Nansen, Peary. I looked for any mention, however oblique, of things seen upon the ice that could not be named. There were hints, a note in a margin about peculiar lights, a line in a private letter about sounds, as of heavy bodies moving where none could be, a half-sentence in a whaler's memoir about the old ice that feels a man. None spoke directly. Perhaps they feared ridicule. Perhaps they, like us, had found that to set such things in plain words was to diminish them, to pretend that they could be contained. Once, many years after, I received a letter from Larsen, posted from Copenhagen. His hand had grown shakier. "I have sailed south now," he wrote. "The Baltic is a tame sea, yet in the winter, when it freezes, I do not go out upon it. The ice here is thin and grey, nothing like Greenland's old white. Still, I feel that weight upon it. I think sometimes that what we saw was not a thing at all, but a way in which the ice itself can be. A mood, perhaps, or a thought. I wrote back, but the letter was returned marked undeliverable. I learned later that he had died that spring, of a fever. As for Henderson, he stayed with the sea, as he had said he would. He rose to his own command in time. We met once in a smoky room above a public house in Dundee, where old whaling men gathered to drink and remember. His hair had gone white, but his back was still straight. We spoke of the usual matters at first: ice conditions, new ships, the decline of the trade. At length, when the others had drifted away, he said quietly, "I have taken ships north every year since. I have seen fogs that swallow a man in 3 paces, floes that rear like walls, auroras that dance like spirits, but I have never again seen anything like that day." "Nor I," I said. He stared into his glass. "Sometimes," he said, "when the wind drops sudden and the sea goes flat, I feel it again, that weight. I stand upon the deck and look out, and I know that if I had the eyes for it, I would see it there, walking as it always has." We parted with a handshake that lingered a moment too long, each of us reluctant to let go of the only other man who had seen what we had seen. Now, as I set these words upon the page in a hand grown unsteady, I find that I have come no closer to an explanation. I have considered every rational possibility. Some atmospheric phenomenon that altered the density of the air, creating mirages and pressures. A mass of ice moving beneath the surface, distorting that above. A shared hallucination born of hunger and cold. Each possibility fails at some point. None accounts for the weight that bent the ice without breaking it, for the way the snow hung motionless in the air, for the dog lifted and flung by nothing. Perhaps, as Larsen suggested, we brushed against some aspect of the ice that is ordinarily closed to us. The Greenlanders have lived beside that ancient frozen sea for generations. Their stories may be closer to the truth than all our charts. What I know is this: the world is older and stranger than our books allow. There are things that move in spaces we think empty, that leave no mark we can read, that feel our passing as we might feel the brush of a gnat. Most of the time they pay us no heed. Once in a great while, perhaps, they turn their pale attention upon us, and we, unprepared, call it a monster. I do not think of it as a monster now. I think of it as the ice itself, walking for a moment where we could see it. What disturbs me most, after all these years, is not its shape, nor the pressure in my lungs, nor the way the dogs pressed themselves flat. It is the memory of how it moved, slowly, without haste, as if it had always been moving, and would go on moving long after we had gone. On certain winter nights when the city falls still and the snow lies unbroken in the street, I wake with the sensation that the bed has sagged slightly beneath me, not from my own weight, but from something passing far below. I lie there, listening to the quiet, feeling the faintest downward pull, and I know that somewhere, unseen, the pale ice walker continues its patient circuit beneath a sky that has forgotten our names.